You really talk about making yourself the owner, like taking care of your own health. Now, I have to step back and say, well, let me look at my 68-year-old mother and my 71-year-old father who rely solely and 100% on their PCP. They go to their doctor and they rely on her for their information. What about the people who just don't even know how to deconstruct medical information or these scientific studies? Like, what about these people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that there's a trend that's happening in our world where, because there's literally, even in just the United States, $10 trillion of industry between healthcare and big food, that so desperately want us to believe that we should not trust ourselves, that we do not have the capacity to understand these complex things like nutrition and our lab work. There's been this paternalistic, infantilizing culture that's been built into every layer of the system. We've literally told people, eat this ultra processed food because it's convenient and it's quick. And then you can be out there climbing the corporate ladder and, working and all this stuff, like outsource food to us. And, we're not going to let you have access to your healthcare records because, it might confuse you and it's dangerous. Like this is built into every layer of the system, and it has disempowered people. It has made people feel like, yeah, I'm just going to put my trust outside of me. But I think the message that I'm really here to share is that I believe that every person, your parents, even young people, need to wake up to the forces, especially the economic reality of what's happening in our food and healthcare system and the dependency and disempowerment that are built into the system, so that we can even start the journey of figuring out some of these things for ourselves. Like, let's just take, this concept of symptoms. In our culture, if you have a symptom like an achy knee or back pain or a headache, first thought is go get the Advil. It's like, we need to squash this. It's intolerable. And a reframe to that, that's so normal. Have a fever, get the Tylenol. Have a sore knee, get the Advil. Because symptoms are a problem. But the reality is that symptoms are a gift. Symptoms are the body's way of telling us that the needs of the cell are not being met. Symptoms cannot arise in a vacuum. They do not arise out of thin air. They arrive necessarily out of cellular dysfunction. And cellular dysfunction is generally rooted in one of two things: the cells not getting what they need to function properly, or the cells being overburdened with toxins and too many factors for them to basically process. And so if we just simply made this cognitive shift that, hey, if I'm feeling unwell, if I'm not waking up every day feeling energetic, happy, absolutely limitless in my potential, then maybe I need to be reflecting on what aspects of my environment are either not meeting the needs of my cells or hurting my cells. And so I think about someone like your parent, like you're talking about. That's absolutely something, a reframe that every person could do, of really tuning into what their body is saying, that does not require a medical degree. It does not require reading any research. It requires simply reframing the experiences we're having every day as information from our body about what it needs. And that doesn't involve any wearables, any lab testing. Certainly, if we want to unlock, I think, the highest levels of longevity and metabolic health, like I said, like sort of the level that has really, I think, never been accessible in human history, it's pairing that amazing body wisdom with some of these incredible biomarkers and testing that we have access to, the biosensors, the wearables, et cetera, to really fine tune. But the core foundation is accessible to everyone. And that's literally just a reframe in the understanding of the fact that our bodies are constantly communicating with us about what they need. And we need to learn how to listen and wake up from the brainwashing that we've had from these systems, these large institutions of trust like healthcare and the USDA and the people who make our food guidelines that basically say, like, we have the answers and you don't need to think about it. And when you have a problem, come to us. We'll give you a pill. We'll wipe it out. That's a problem.
I love the theory of symptoms are a gift from your body. They're basically speaking to you and telling you what's, if something's wrong. And then this is where blood biomarkers come into it, because I think that we have to take this is what I always say. Why did my body think it was a good idea to do this? And I'll give you an example. I don't know the statistics, but there are many people in the US who have vitamin D deficiency. Myself, I had it as well, which I've discussed with you. I think I had a reading back in September of 20 nanograms per deciliter, which is screamingly low, and it is extremely deficient. Now, most people would look at their blood work, or even look at what, their PCP will look at their blood work and say, yep, you've got low vitamin D. Here, I'm going to give you 5,000 or even scarily 10,000 IUs of vitamin D, without recognizing that, do you have a magnesium deficiency, for example? I've seen in many cases that you can raise the levels of vitamin D in your blood without even taking vitamin D, with just taking magnesium, because we need magnesium to synthesize the vitamin D. Or another potential factor could be, why did my body think it was good to lower vitamin D? Maybe it's because we've got heavy metal or toxic exposure in our body. In the presence of metal, we lower vitamin D. So I think about this often, this whole notion of symptoms and listening to our body, and actually asking yourself, if you have a headache, why did my body think it was a good idea to inflict pain in this area of my body? Maybe you don't want to think about it for a headache, but maybe start to think about it like this. Even gut dysbiosis, like, why does my body think it's a good idea? Like, what am I not putting in my gut? What am I not feeding my gut for it to feel this way and be in such dysfunction? Does that make sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I think one framework that I have for the body that really motivates me is, like, I have these 40 trillion cells in my body. I have 40 trillion human cells. I have 100 trillion or so bacterial cells in my body. And each of them, they're unable to speak to me through words. They can't communicate with me through language. And so they're communicating with me through symptoms and through potentially diseases that emerge, or they're communicating to me through a sense of, like, total peace and happiness, and just a sense of being that is also a way of communicating, right? It's just communicating to me like everything's good. And I, as the whole self, the self that is essentially the summation of all these cells, like, I am basically the mother to all these cells. These are my 40 trillion, human children cells, my 100 trillion bacterial cells. And since they can't speak to me through language, like a baby can't talk to you and tell you what it needs, it's just going to scream, right? And the cells screaming is the symptoms. And so it's my job to, just like as I would with an infant, to just run through the basic checklist of, what does a cell need? And is that cell getting it? And the beauty of molecular biology research and cellular biology, sort of biochemical, nutritional biochemistry research, more cell signaling research, that's really where I spend the most of my time on PubMed, because it's there that we can really start to understand, like, what are the components, what are the molecular and energetic components that cells in the body need to function properly. Like, we literally just need, certain types of fatty acids to make up our cell membranes. We need specific micronutrients as enzymatic cofactors for our electron transport chain. We need certain micronutrients to make a selenoprotein. It needs selenium. Like, it's pretty basic stuff. And so it's taking stock of sort of the basic factors of our life, and then seeing, like, where am I crushing and where do I need to kind of lean in a little bit? With a baby, a newborn, it's like, does it need to change a diaper? Does it need milk? Does it need to sleep? Does it need a change in temperature? And I think for our human cells, it's basically like, how's the food? How's the stress environment? How's the movement? How's the sleep? How's the light exposure that it's been getting? What's the toxin environment? What's the temperature environment? Those are the main pillars. So it's like, okay, and then the way that I communicate then with my cells is by putting them in an environment that gives them those signals. So one way that I can communicate with my cells is through food, which will break down into molecules, which then is information that I'm giving to them. Another way I can communicate with my cells is through energetic signals like temperature, heat, and cold. Another way I can communicate with my cells is through photons. I can literally give it photons, or I cannot by exposing it to sunlight. So that's a way, I think, of thinking about how to connect with your body. And when you communicate clearly to your body through the signals that it expects, wants, and needs to function properly, we magically have health and the symptoms melt away. And when we don't, we will get cries, and those will be our symptoms. So until you move towards a state that is really like symptom-free, it means there is room for better communication. And like one specific example of this is like, I think of essentially food cravings, and I talk about this in the book, in the section, one of my favorite chapters of the book, which is essentially the 6 principles of good energy eating, this good energy metabolic health framework in the book. And one of them is that cravings are a signal from your body that you are giving it mixed messages in regard to food. And it kind of actually goes back to intersects with the Ozempic conversation. Because if you think about cravings, they are fundamentally rooted in the satiety mechanisms of the body not being triggered appropriately. When we eat whole, real, natural food filled with all the nutrients the body needs, the nutrient sensing cells of the gut have that communication with them, which then causes them to communicate back with hormones that tell us not to be hungry. But when it doesn't have those needs met, when we don't give it the real, natural, unprocessed food filled with the micronutrients that it needs, the body's going to keep asking for more to have its needs met. And that's cravings, essentially. So we should look at these, so many Americans are dealing with insatiable cravings for certain foods. And I think what's just a framework that people can adopt is, okay, if I can actually give these nutrient sensing cells what they need, they will produce the chemical that relinquishes my craving. And that's essentially freedom, right? Because craving is essentially the root of suffering, and lack of craving is freedom. So the reason this intersects with the Ozempic conversation is that, like, Ozempic is a GLP-1 agonist, right? That in a sense makes us crave less food. And what's wild to just, step back and realize, like, we are actually GLP-1 agonists ourselves. If we stimulate those cells of the gut to make GLP-1, like, that's just going to work in our favor to make us less hungry. And there's been lots of research that shows what nutrients in food stimulate the nutrient sensing cells of the gut to produce this hormone. And it's the things you'd expect. It's amino acids from protein. Yeah. It's short chain fatty acids, which are the microbial fermentation byproduct of fiber intake. It's the things we know are quote unquote healthy, but part of the reason they're healthy is that they create a signal to the body to secrete the hormones that we need to make us satiated. So that's kind of a framing that I think can be helpful for thinking about some of these concepts.